Hello, Cleveland, and welcome back once again to another episode of the Dogland Podcast. I am your host, Jackson McCurry, and joining me as usual lately, Mr. Jack Duffin. Jack, how are you, buddy?
It's the final countdown. This is it.
No more offense.
End of the offense. We're ending it with the. It's not quite as sexy as a fullback, but it's close behind, and that is the interior offensive line.
Yes, whole lot of beef on this episode, talking about the middle of that offensive line. But if you guys didn't listen Monday, go back and listen to our offensive tackle edition of the offseason deep dive into the Browns roster. And also go check out the articles over at thedogland.com written by Mr. Duffin, who's knocking it out of the park with all his content this month. Definitely go check that out. But we are talking interior offensive line, Jack. It's probably the strength of the offensive line. Not even probably. It is the strength of the offensive line. You got two all-pros at the guards. You got a solid center, but there could be change on the horizon with this group. So it's going to be interesting this offseason, specifically the man in the middle, which we'll get to. But let's talk about the guards first. Wyatt Teller, Joel Bitonio. Theoretically, Jack, these are our guards for 2022 and definitely 2023 because they both just re-upped and signed massive extensions during the middle of the season.
Yeah, so really telling sign for what the Browns want to do moving forward is they paid both of these dudes pretty much a couple of days apart. And it really made that decision that here's where we're going to put the money for the next couple of years in the O-line, and sort of said to the rest of the dudes, whether you're Tretter, whether you're Conklin, that, hey, you're not getting paid. And hey, you can't pay everyone. So the minute you decide to pay one dude, that can be another guy's loss. In the same way, hey, Sheldon Richardson getting cut was the best thing that happened for the pay Nick Chubb crowd. Those sorts of things all get linked up. So it's a strong deal for both guards. They come in at Teller at $14.2 million a year and Bitonio at $16 million a year. Closer to each other than you would think with that number, purely just the way there was more money lying around, and Bitonio had another year left at $10 million, and that, to be fair to the Browns, they more or less threw that out the window and moved him up. So really, really similar deals overall, but there's outs in them as well. So you're looking at 2 more years of Wyatt Teller. To touch on his first. So he's definitely going to be on the roster the next 2 years. And then that's where the Browns have given themselves the option of, do we want to keep paying this guy or do we not? And that's important, that we've seen some great stuff from Wyatt Teller, but at the same time, let's not overcommit ourselves. 2 more years, and then we've got team options for 2 more years on the back of that. And then with Joel Bitonio, just looking through the deal, you've got, 2 more years committed to Joel, and then you've got 2 years where you've got team options. And that's exactly where you want to be, because dudes regress, something goes wrong, someone gets injured, someone gets old. You never really want to start guaranteeing years more than 2 years into the future. And I think, using my mind of the guardrails, it says 2 years. So that's exactly where they want to be.
Yeah, definitely. And side note, both of their contracts for 2023, those salaries guarantee towards the middle of March, right after free agency starts. So they are definitely locked in for at least the next 2 years. Whether they go beyond that, yet to see. Bitonio's not showing any signs of tapering off. Teller kind of had his ups and downs after he got paid, which, is a little bit of a cause for concern. But at the same time, we've seen some of those vicious blocks he threw out there. It might have just been, he might have just had his bumps and bruises, and maybe they were affecting him a little bit, but we locked them both up. They're both made the all-pro team. I don't expect them to take a deep dive next year or 2023. So it's good that they had those two locked up and long-term for the Browns. I use air quotes when I say long-term.
Yeah. And obviously it's one as well where, even though we're saying, hey, these dudes are here for the next 2 years, they could trade because it is just guaranteed salary. So that's always the other bonus option that they could look, because someone would take those dudes. They're fantastic. Ideally, they keep balling at the level they're balling, and we're happy days. Just obviously, if you've listened to the last show, you heard us talk about Bitonio's left tackle. And that's one hate. We'll touch on it. I'm willing to say there's a 100% chance that Teller is going to be the right tackle next year. I would say there's about a 95% chance that Bitonio is the left guard, because who knows? I think there's a 5% chance he moves out. So I'm not saying it's a likely sort of scenario, but I'm saying that there is a possibility. And if that happens, I think Dunn is your most likely guy to actually come in and play left guard. You've got Chris Hubbard that I mentioned, obviously had a phenomenal time at guard during the 2020 season. But I think they would trust Dunn, which seems crazy to say. But why not? At the end of the day, if you're doing a job where you've got so much other talent along the line, it's not a hard as ask. And putting someone on the interior is safer than throwing them out wide.
Yeah, I would agree. I think if they were to move Bitonio out, which we talked about on the tackle episode, I think Dunn is the most likely at left guard. We all seen what he did in the wild card game against Pittsburgh in 2020, absolutely containing Cameron Hayward. And then he started 2 games, once against Vegas. So I think he was solid. Obviously, the Green Bay game, he got a little bit more exposed, allowed 2 sacks and 7 pressures against Green Bay's defense, which was clicking at that point. But yeah, I feel like he's got the inside track. The Browns have him on a relatively cheap deal. I think it's close to the minimum, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's definitely peanuts. So yeah, I mean, if they hypothetically did what we've dreamed up about Bitonio playing left tackle, Dunn clearly has the inside track. Jack, when you talk about the depth at the guard positions, you have Dunn. You also have Blake Hance, who had to play at tackle. As things stand right now, we don't know what Hance's future is. Maybe they see him more as an interior that can swing out at tackle in an emergency situation. Jack, do you think they keep both backup guards? Do you see a scenario where they may maybe draft one and start molding potentially Bitonio or Teller's replacement, not named Michael Dunn?
Yeah, so 2 years ago they kept 9, and then last year they kept 10 on the O-line. And that's really that 9th to 10th spot is your second guard, because you're naturally more inclined to keep the 4 tackles because it's a more valuable position and one where you want more time to develop it. And as well, if you can play tackle, you can usually stick a guy inside and cover a guard. I'm not saying all tackles can go in and play guard, but it's easier. Obviously, we've seen Nick Harris, who we'll come on to later, that forcing a dude further out from the middle is a lot harder than forcing someone in. So I think it's going to be 3 here, because I think they'll want to use that 10th spot for something else. But if it is a case where they want to bring in a load of young dudes, I think it makes sense. So I wouldn't rule out a day 3 pick. It won't come any higher than that. I think you're looking at 5th, 6th, or 7th round. If there is a guard they like, then why not take a punt? But it's not going to be a high priority, because, why are you going to spend assets replacing someone, developing someone, when you're not really looking for them for the next 2 years? Just doesn't make sense.
And we mentioned it on the tackle episode. If they're not high on Blake Hance, they could always bring back Chris Hubbard on a cheap minimum veteran deal, like a 1-year deal, to where he can play, and he's shown he could play both guard and tackle. So if they feel Hubbard is a better option, even in his 30s, than Blake Hance, who's still in his mid-20s, the Browns could also go in that direction as well.
Yeah, and I haven't looked at the really deep, cheap, dirty free agents of those sort of like 1-2 million guys. There will be some out there. Maybe there's something from the Vikings. It's going to be one to look at, because any of these dudes that Stefanski's worked with are now on the market, because we're going to have a change in coaching staff. Obviously, we've got our boy Kwesi there. That those sort of guys that go, hey, it might have only been a swing person and barely played, but if Stefanski goes, hey, I like this guy, let's bring him in, and Callahan okays it, then you could always look at that. But they're going to bring in a lot of competition. And yeah, if you bring in a 6th, then it's done a 6th round pick and Blake Hance competing to be who's going to be guard 3, 4 and cut. hey, it's a fair place to be at. And Dunn can also cover a bit of center.
Yes, he can. And as we transition to the center position, the looming question of this offseason, one of the looming questions, obviously, is the future of JC Tretter. He's coming up on his last year. The Browns can't get out of it. They drafted Nick Harris in 2020, and everybody has pegged him to be the center of the future. We got to see that, obviously, on display Christmas Day against Green Bay. Jack, you got to see it live and in person. I thought Harris played well, and I think it kind of made the decision a little easier, seeing him against a good defense in Green Bay, performing well. But, Tretter, he's got 1 year left. He could retire because the injuries have been around, especially since he's been in Cleveland. He has fought through some injuries. He's still solid. I mean, I'm anxious to see what the Browns' decision is. I would tend to think that they're going to cut him, but we don't really know that the direction right now. We haven't heard any inklings as to what Tretter's future is.
Yeah, so this is one that, for me, my gut and analytical head says we can get 90% of the production out of Harris. Let's just move on to that, because Harris is now going to be coming up to this year 3 for Harris, I want to say.
Yes.
And that's what we said. Year 3 is a really important year where you need to decide, because if he is good, then lock him up and let's have him for the future. Whereas if you go, hey, we're going to roll with Tretter this year and then throw him in for year 4, yeah, you can just pay a guy year 4 and then just stop him being a free agent. But it's like you want to sort of know and get in there early, and then you're only bidding against yourself at that point, because you could say to him, hey, let's do your deal now after year 3. You played okay. You weren't top 10 center, but you're in that sort of 10 to 20 range, and that we're happy with that because you've got 2 studs next to you at guard. Let's just do a nice deal. And then the players are actually, yeah, I'll sign it now, guarantee me some money. Whereas you have a bad year 4 and then suddenly no one wants you. So you can always play that game. Whereas if someone's has a great year 4, he's probably a free agent, because he's there going, well, I'm going to go check the market and they're going to pay me more than you because you've spent all your money on 2 guards. You're then in a riskier position. So I'd rather know early. Conklin, to go back to him, could actually play into this scenario, though, because if they get rid of Conklin and Bitonio jumps out to left tackle, they might not want a Dunn Harris pairing between Bitonio and Teller. So, and as well, if they're freeing up 12 million from Conklin by moving on from him, hey, we don't really mind paying Tretter now. And the saving from Conklin actually just goes into keeping a really, really good center. So, yeah, my natural reaction is I would say it's about 50-50. But if it's me, I'm ready to move on to Nick Harris and let's just roll with it.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, we can't keep the veterans around forever. We got to start letting these young guys have an opportunity. Like I said, I loved what I saw out of Harris, how athletic he was moving on certain like run plays. And I thought he blocked well. Obviously gave up no pressures, no sacks. I thought it was a solid, clean game for him against Green Bay. As much as I like Tretter, even though some of the stuff with the NFLPA has been a headache at times with his dealings since he's become PA president, but I think it's time to move on. It's time to give Nick Harris an opportunity and let's see what he can do. He's going on year 3. We've seen only small sample sizes of him. Wasn't the best at guard, but I thought he was good at center, and I feel like they can move on and make an easy transition, giving him the whole offseason to let him get the first team reps.
Yeah, and it's one where don't let that guard display worry you. He has not been drafted to be a guard, and I never want to see him play guard again. In the same way, I would never want to see, let's go, Austin Hooper play running back. Never want to see it.
No.
Because it is a vastly different position. It's not kind of the same thing. It's a different body type. It's like the difference between wide receivers and tight ends. Yeah, you can do a little bit of it, but it's different. If you took tight ends and stuck them out wide and then put wide receivers in to block, for the whole season, you're going to get weird, dodgy stuff. They are in their spots for a reason. So I think, let's go and see it and roll from there. And as the backup, I don't mind if you keep Dunn, you draft a guy, and Dunn could potentially, if you are keeping Bitonio there, Dunn's your sort of guard and center cover, and you draft a guy, and you can then use him wherever you want, because Dunn's just solid and he's a really nice holding piece.
Here's another name. It's a guy that haven't seen on the field much at all in his 3 or 4 years with the Browns. Drew Forbes. That's another player X from the 2019 draft. He's such an interesting figure because his name always gets brought up. 2020, he was supposed to be competing with Teller for the right guard position. Then he opted out because of COVID. Then last year he was on IR. He's still under contract. It's going to be his last year. He could play into the role. His name's always brought up. It means the Browns must like him. Callahan took a liking to him from what he saw on tape. Could be another guy where he could be a backup guard. He could be backup center potentially too.
No, it's certainly one to look at. They've got 2 years left with him.
Is it 2 years?
Because they got the COVID year back.
Oh, okay.
So he's got 2 more years under contract.
And it's relatively cheap too.
Oh, it's pittance what we're talking about. We're talking about $1 million this year and $1.1 million next year. So irrelevant, nothing. In the grand scheme of it, a player's earning about that anyway as the cheapest on the salary scale. So he's certainly in that mix. And to be fair, that might be the case that they're sat here with Dunn, Hans, Forbes, Harris, these other dudes, and they just don't even use a pick. So yeah, if the hype around Forbes is real, which I just don't know if it is, then yeah, just roll with this unit and let's see what sticks. And it could be one where considered the better guy now just doesn't make it because they're looking at position flexibility and everything else and feel, hey, Drew Forbes is the guy. We have absolutely loved him for 2 years and we have not been able to get him a snap. And that's just sometimes the way it rolls.
Yeah, and Forbes is still only 25 and limited snaps. I mean, he might have some fresh legs. I mean, he really hasn't been on a football field in 3 or 4 years. Who knows what he has at this point, but the Browns keep him around, even though it's been a regime change. Let's see what they make of him come this offseason and into the training camp. So as we wrap things up, Jack, the offensive side is done, which means we're flipping over to the defense, which is going to be interesting. Go ahead and plug all the articles you've done so far. They've been fantastic. And go ahead and plug your Twitter as well.
Yeah, so 6 articles down. Go over to thedogland.com, check them out. Let me know what you think. That feedback, hit me up with it, guys. But no, it's been a really, really fun series so far. Obviously, next week we're on to the big stuff, which is Myles Garrett and a really empty room at the moment. So we'll be touching on that. But yeah, hit me up. It's at Jack Duffin on Twitter, DUFFIN. And where can people find you, buddy?
At Jack Mercury08 on Twitter. Like he said, thedogland.com. We're on Twitter at thedogland. Also on Facebook. Go over and give us a like. We post all our content over there as well. You can listen to podcasts on Facebook. So if you listen to the podcast through Facebook, we thank you. If you listen through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else, thank you. Leave us a review, share, subscribe. Thanks for sticking with us for nearly 5 years now. We appreciate it. And as always, as we get on out of here, go Browns.
Go Browns.